Hello, supply chain professionals. Since I have started posting content on my channel, the most common question I've been getting is how do I enter the supply chain profession? And this question is coming both from fresh graduates and experienced individuals as well. And the types of questions I get are, do I need an MBA to enter supply chain? I'm an engineer. How do I enter supply chain? I've got 10 years of experience in another industry, or I'm doing my bachelor's, or I'm doing my master's. How do I enter the supply chain industry, and all those kind of things? And the funniest question I actually got recently from someone was, my math is really poor, and can I still do a job in supply chain or not? So I thought that in order to answer these types of questions, I'll make a two-part video series where in this part, I will talk about how you can enter the supply chain profession as a fresh graduate. And in the next video, we will talk about the same question for experienced professionals. My name is Jamil Hai, and I've been working in supply chain management positions across South Asia, Middle East, and North America for the last 20 years. And my mission is to help people like you build real life skills for your job and career that they don't teach you in college. And if you are preparing for a supply chain job interview anytime soon, you should definitely book a session with me, because I'm going to take your resume, the job description you're applying for, and based on a combination of those two and my 20 years of experience, will give you some laser guided tips and tricks which will maximize your chances of success. So go ahead now and book your next session on my LinkedIn profile. So fresh graduates, I will share with you 4 different routes you can take to enter the supply chain profession. But before doing that, I will share with you 6 pivotal skills you need in order to succeed in a supply chain career. The first one is self-awareness. Now, self-awareness, in my opinion, is the most important human skill you can have. Whether you are working in supply chain or any other industry, it doesn't matter. Because if you don't have self-awareness, it's a massive problem, because you don't know what your strengths are or what your weaknesses are. And we are living in a time and age where there is so much competition that you really need to know your strengths in order to double down on them and leverage them. Now, if you are interested in learning more about self-awareness and how you can improve it, I've actually made a video on this topic, which you can watch by clicking over here. So definitely self-awareness is a skill which is on the top of my list. The second important skill to succeed in supply chain is verbal and written communication. Supply chain is all about talking to different stakeholders. If you have watched my previous videos, I've talked extensively about the SCORE model, or the plan, source, make, deliver, return, enable model. And you can see that this model defines supply chain and what supply chain really is. And you are basically connecting the dots between the customer, between the supplier side and the customer side, and all these steps are in between. So in order to be a successful supply chain person, you need to be able to effectively communicate across all these different parts of supply chain, whether it's verbal communication or written communication. The third most critical skill in supply chain is problem solving. If you are someone who does not enjoy problem solving, or doesn't get excited by the idea of problem solving, then probably supply chain is not the right industry for you. Why? Because in a supply chain role, whether you are doing a role in purchasing or in planning or in a factory, you will be solving problems on a day-to-day basis. Supply chain is all about being in a dynamic world where every single day can pose a new challenge for you, and you have to step up and resolve those challenges. So it's very hard to predict that what kind of problems you will face, because it's such a dynamic industry. But that ability to problem solve, that mindset to problem solve, is absolutely critical in supply chain. So this is a very good litmus test if you are thinking about whether I should join supply chain or not, and you are someone who is saying that, you know what, I really don't enjoy problem solving, then probably supply chain is not for you. But on the contrary, if you are someone who loves to problem solve, who looks to problems as an opportunity and really wants to get to the root cause of things and improve them, then supply chain is the right industry for you. Then you have got analytical ability. Now, analytical ability is your ability to crunch numbers, to understand numbers, make meaning out of numbers, and then apply those numbers to your problem solving process. And unfortunately, the guy who asked me the question, my math is not good and can I succeed in supply chain? The answer for you, my friend, is no, because supply chain is all about numbers. So if you are someone who runs away from numbers and doesn't enjoy dealing with numbers, crunching numbers, or really kind of getting deeper into what these numbers mean, then it will be very hard for you to succeed in supply chain. Because whether you are working in a warehouse or you are working in planning, planning, especially because planning is all about numbers. But it's not just limited to planning, whether you are in purchasing, because you are making those day-to-day decisions, you are making those problem statements, and you're trying to solve those problems. So a lot of those problems are numbers driven. So analytical ability and ability to crunch numbers is absolutely important. And the next skill is conflict management. Because you are working with a lot of people in a lot of different roles, you will definitely run into conflicts. It's just very, very natural. So your conflict management or your ability to resolve conflicts collaboratively with people is absolutely important. And once again, if you want to improve your conflict management skills, you can watch this video right there. And finally, you need to be a good people manager if you want to succeed in your supply chain career long term, because you will do an individual contributor role for the first 5, 6, 7 years. But after that, at some point in time in your career, unless you really choose a path where you just want to work individually, which by the way is also an option in supply chain. In fact, with how the industry is evolving and how much the data analytics is coming into the supply chain industry, a lot of individual contributor jobs are also increasing. However, if your desire is really to become one day the supply chain director or a supply chain vice president, then you cannot achieve those roles if you are not good at managing people. So you really need to learn how to manage people. And there are some great resources. I talk on my channel a lot about Ken Blanchard. He's a fantastic writer of management books. One of the most key concepts I've learned through his books is the situational leadership model, which I think as a manager is always helpful for me. And then, of course, you also need to understand the difference between management and leadership, and also try to understand how you can become a good leader over the long term. So, of course, these skills are required if you really want to grow in this industry long term. So now that we have covered those 6 pivotal skills, let's talk about the 4 different ways in which you can enter supply chain as a fresh graduate. The first one is for engineers. If you are a fresh graduate engineer, then you can simply enter supply chain by applying for jobs in supply chain. And the best way for you to enter the industry is look for some manufacturing jobs, because in manufacturing companies, in factories, of course, they are always looking for engineers. So that could be your one of the good options to enter supply chain. However, it doesn't have to be a factory job. I mean, I've talked a lot on this channel about my own story because I call myself an accidental supply chain manager, because I applied many years ago for my first job at Procter and Gamble, and I actually applied in a factory-based role, assuming that I was a fresh graduate electrical engineer right out of the college. And I was thinking they will offer me a job in a factory because they will probably need electrical engineers to fix their machines and all of that stuff. But then they said to me that, no, we don't have a job in the factory, but you know what, we have got a job in this thing called supply chain. And I was like, what is supply chain? I had no idea about supply chain at that time. But they actually hire engineers in supply chain because of one of the skills I talked about earlier, which is the analytical skills. And I was so confused because I was like, I'm an engineer. What will I do in supply chain? I really don't know. This company makes shampoos and soaps. So what am I really going to do there? So I went to one of my professors that I really respect a lot. And I always used to take his advice very seriously. So he gave me a great advice. And he said that what engineering has taught you is the ability to analyze things. Or in other words, what engineering has given you is that analytical ability, because for 4 years you have been trained on understanding numbers in a different context though, right? If you are becoming an electrical engineer, then you are applying that analytical ability to transmission, distribution, those kind of things. If you are a mechanical engineer, you are applying it in machines. If you are a civil engineer, you are applying those skills in making buildings, and same thing, and the list goes on, right? So he explained to me that what we have trained you on is that ability to analyze. And you can apply that in any industry. So you don't have to worry about, hey, what am I going to do in this company or in this industry? So he really encouraged me to take that leap of faith. And I think that was one of the best advice I got. And that's why I've enjoyed this journey so much. So engineers, definitely, if you want to enter the supply chain field, then just apply for jobs and try to express your ability to problem solve and your ability to analyze stuff in those job interviews. If you think you are lacking a supply chain certification, then maybe I can recommend you should look at the Apex CSCP certification, because that will also give you a little bit of a validation that, hey, you also know about the supply chain industry. But is that absolutely critical for you to get your first job? Probably not. Now let's talk about the second route on how you can get into supply chain, and that is simply by getting a degree in supply chain or doing a bachelor's in supply chain management. And people who are going to college now or in the last 5 years or about to go and enter their college life or university life, you guys are very lucky because supply chain is now taught as a separate subject. And you can actually get degrees in supply chain, which is fantastic because when I was doing my engineering 20 years ago, or more than that actually, this was not even an option, at least in the country where I grew up, right? So if you have the option of getting a 4-year program in supply chain, that is really helpful. Or if you've already done your bachelor's and you have the option of doing like a condensed master program, which within 1 year gets you some kind of certification, validation, or degree in supply chain, then by no means go for it. Now, one common misconception I want to really address here is, and this is one of the questions I get a lot on the channel, right? Which is, do I need to do an MBA in supply chain, or do I need to do an MBA in general? I have a very strong opinion, and once again, you need to take anyone's opinions with a pinch of salt. However, I am not at all, at least in today's time and age, a fan of doing an MBA and spending like hundreds and thousands of dollars on a degree like this, because the world is changing. Unless you're going to the Harvard Business School, or you're going to the Columbia University in New York, or to one of these very prestigious Ivy League schools, because then it gets you really that overall environment and gets you that networking, which can be helpful in building a career post MBA. Otherwise, not recommended at all, because the education world has changed a lot. I mean, the education world is probably still catching up, but the world around education has changed a lot. So you can, now we are living in an age where if you want to become, let's say, a data analyst, right, you can do like 5 or 6 certifications online and become an expert in data analytics, or at least start scratching the surface of that industry. So in order to gain the ability to enter the supply chain profession, I really don't think MBA is required. And in fact, I believe that it's a very strong overkill. So you should definitely not take that route. Certifications, absolutely yes. And certifications also, I've made a separate video which you can watch by clicking over here, where I've talked about situations in which certifications are helpful. But bottom line, the second route, take a bachelor's degree in supply chain, because that's a very good option. And maybe in one of the future videos, I'll talk about the top schools in supply chain in the US, in Canada, and in probably in India as well. Now let's talk about the third route of entering supply chain, and that I'm calling it the data route. So you can become a data analyst, or you can become a machine learning expert, or you can become an AI expert nowadays by doing some AI certifications. Basically, if you have the skill of managing complex data, especially using some of the newer technologies available out there, that could be a very good way for you to enter supply chain and actually apply those data skills to real life business problems in a very efficient way. In one of my recent podcasts, where I invited Aileen Sandoval, who is a senior digital technologies leader in the industry, we talked about how the supply chain jobs are evolving more in the data space, because supply chain always was sitting on tons of data, right? If you think about just a truck going from, let's say, New York to San Francisco, there is so much data that truck itself is generating. At what speed did it travel, at what temperatures, and some of these data points have got a lot of consequences, because if let's say you were carrying frozen items in that truck, and the temperature of that truck changed and got into a range where it is dangerous for that product itself, or it can make that product damaged, then of course it's a problem, right? So monitoring that data is very, very important. And that is just one of the many, many examples. Imagine every time a consumer is buying something from the shelf, a supply chain data point is getting generated, because that's a sale, which then triggers a replenishment. Somebody is then picking up a pallet and replenishing in a warehouse. So lots of different data points have always existed in supply chain. But what is different now is that with the abilities, machine learning, AI, and some of the newer technologies, which have actually now crossed a point where they are no longer things which are done in a lab. I mean, AI, we are all using it in different shapes and form, not just Chat GPT. So those technologies have now come to a point where now supply chain managers can really take the advantage of that data and analyze it without going through a lot of pain. So there's a prediction that in the next 5 years, the biggest number of increase in supply chain jobs is going to be in that data field, which is not surprising at all. So If you are someone who has got a data certification, or he or she is a data analyst, then it's a very good time for you to enter the supply chain industry. And finally, let's talk about a scenario where you are a fresh graduate, but you are neither an engineer, you don't have a supply chain degree, or you are not a data specialist or data analyst and things like that. How can you enter supply chain? Well, the good news is that there is still a way, which is just get an entry level operational job, right? So go and work in an Amazon warehouse. Of course, I know those jobs are not very easy to get, but those jobs keep coming all the time, right? Whether it's Amazon or any other e-commerce player, or you go and work for any third-party logistics company. Because one of the other key questions I keep getting all the time is that from people who are working in warehouses, and they ask me that, oh, we are working as a logistics coordinator, how can we enter supply chain? Well, my friend, you are already in supply chain. If you are working in logistics is a very critical part of supply chain. Once again, if I go back to that score model, we talked about plan, source, make, deliver, return, enable. So that deliver portion in the score model is all about logistics, because that talks about warehousing, it talks about transportation. So whether you are a truck driver, whether you are someone who is loading pallets into a truck, or you are someone who is doing cycle counting in a warehouse, or you're doing any type of other reconciliation job in the warehouse, or moving pallets and this kind of stuff, you are already in supply chain. Welcome. Now, the question I think which is more relevant is that how can you grow from those roles, which is a very different question than saying that, hey, I'm in supply chain, or hey, I'm in logistics, I want to come into supply chain. Well, the way you can grow from a logistics operator role, and I've seen so many examples over my 20-year career where people actually joined as truck drivers, or they joined as someone who was just picking up pallets or moving stuff around a warehouse, and they ended up becoming supply chain managers or senior planners. And how do you really do that? The key is that, first of all, spend some time in operations, learn operations, make sure that you understand the full details and how things are done on the factory floor or on the warehouse floor, so that you get that operational experience. And once you have gotten enough experience, then try to apply for more complex roles in supply chain. So once, let's say, you have done a warehouse coordinator role for 3-4 years, then try to find out if you can get a planning job in the same company, or you can get an entry level, let's say, analyst job in the company, right? So you will have to demonstrate some key skills, and a lot of those skills will be around those 6 that I talked about at the beginning of the video, right? So you can go back and watch it if you missed that part. But the key is that in logistics, once you have the experience, you have in a very good position to excel in supply chain. It's just that how do you maneuver your career? So from that deliver space in supply chain, how can you find a role maybe in purchasing? You go to source. Or how can you get a role in planning? How can you get a role, maybe a more senior role in a factory? Let's say you might become like a shift manager, where you are managing a shift or managing a team of people. Or you can also become a technician, right? So there are so many different things in the make environment as well that you could do. And especially now with the advent of e-commerce, you may also want to explore areas where you may want to become, for instance, an expert in reverse logistics, which is return in this model. Or if you like IT work, or if you understand a little bit of coding, or you have aptitude towards going for like more technical jobs, then you can also become, let's say, imagine as a warehouse coordinator, you became an expert of managing the WMS in that warehouse. And then you learn, let's say you are using Blue Yonder, or you are using Manhattan, or any other WMS in your warehouse. So you could become an expert of that, and then you can use that as a gateway to get another job as a WMS expert in another company, which might pay you more salary, and then build your career maybe in the supply chain technology space. So lots of different ways to maneuver into supply chain, even if you don't have a formal degree and so on. But those routes mostly starts with operation. In general, anyone in supply chain, even if he or she is an engineer, or they have a formal qualification in supply chain, they should always start with operations. Because what you learn, and I think this is also something that we talked about in one of my podcasts some time ago with Wali Khan, who talked about how to get a supply chain job in Saudi Arabia. So I will also put a link of that podcast here. He mentioned a very useful tip that operational experience you'll get in the first 4 or 5 years of your career is basically irreplaceable, because you will always get your cubicle, your laptop, and your corner office to work on your stuff and all those kind of things. But what you will learn by loading a truck at 2 a.m. in the morning, or by troubleshooting a problem in a factory at midnight, that experience is really valuable, and it will take you a long way in your supply chain journey. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I've also made videos on topics like supply chain KPIs and how to pass a warehouse manager job interview, which you can watch by clicking over here. Keep watching.